My name is Adrian Cole, and for the past 3 summers I have worked as a fire lookout stationed in the boreal forests of northern Alberta. It is a role that demands solitude, vigilance, and a willingness to abide by a set of rules that at first seemed eccentric, even arbitrary, but which I have come to understand as the very conditions of my survival. My introduction to this job was formal in its simplicity: 1 tower, 1 cabin, 1 supply shed, and a spiral staircase climbing into the sky. I was told I would live alone for weeks at a time, scanning the horizon for the faintest trace of smoke. The official purpose of my employment was to protect the land from wildfire, but the deeper reason, I soon learned, was to protect myself from what lurks in the forests when dusk falls. Those instructions were never printed in a manual. They were spoken in clipped tones by my supervisor, left as warnings scribbled in pencil on the back of maps, and carved into the wood of the desk inside the tower. These rules, obscure as they once seemed, are the boundary between sanity and disappearance, between walking out alive at the end of the season and becoming another name mentioned in whispers among the few of us who choose to work here. I was 26 when I accepted the assignment. The application process was straightforward enough. No one else wanted the job. You needed to be capable of staying alone for long stretches, tolerate the relentless boredom, and be dependable enough not to fall asleep when your only task was to keep your eyes open. What appealed to me was not heroism but the quiet. I had been living in Edmonton, working odd shifts in a warehouse, worn down by noise and crowds. The idea of retreating to a tower with only the wind and the birds for company seemed like relief. I did not understand then that I was also stepping into a place where ordinary laws did not fully apply, and where obedience to unwritten rules meant more than loyalty to the government that paid my modest salary. The first day I arrived, a ranger named Dalton drove me out in a battered pickup. He was a broad man, lined face, eyes that squinted permanently as though he had stared too long at horizons. We rattled along a dirt road that dwindled to a track, and eventually stopped where the tower rose like a spindly needle among the trees. The structure was taller than I imagined, its narrow cage of steel steps coiling upward into an observation box with glass walls. A small wooden cabin sat nearby, patched from many seasons, its paint long stripped by weather. Dalton killed the engine, and for a moment all I could hear was the buzz of insects and the far-off creak of trees swaying. He turned to me then, serious, and asked if I had been told the rules. I said no. He exhaled through his teeth and shook his head. Figures. They never do. He reached into the glove compartment, drew out a folded sheet of paper, and pressed it into my hand. Read these. Don't laugh at them. Don't ignore them. If you want to walk out at the end of the season, follow every line. I glanced at the page 7 rules written in blocky handwriting, stained with old coffee rings. They seemed absurd. But Dalton's expression left no room for argument. That night, after unloading supplies and climbing the tower to look at the endless expanse of forest stretching to the horizon, I sat at the small desk in the cabin and studied the rules by lamplight. Rule 1: never descend the tower steps after midnight, no matter what you hear. Rule 2: if you see a fire, report it, but do not look too long at the smoke. It has ways of looking back. Rule 3: when you count the trees at dawn, if the number changes from the previous day, do not speak of it aloud. Rule 4: if someone knocks at the cabin door after dark, do not answer. There is no one out here. Rule 5: keep the radio on, even if static fills the air. Sometimes the static is the only warning. Rule 6: do not trust the mirrors after sunset. Rule 7: remember you are not alone, even when you think you are. I read them again and again, half amused, half unsettled. It felt like folklore written by some lonely predecessor to pass the time. Yet something about Dalton's face lingered, and when I slid the paper into the drawer, I already knew I would obey. If only because disobedience seemed to risk more than ridicule. The first week passed quietly. Mornings were filled with the ritual of climbing the tower, sweeping binoculars across the green sea of spruce and pine, noting weather conditions, radioing routine reports. Afternoons dragged into heat and silence. Sometimes I would sketch the outlines of ridges, or record the flight of a hawk tracing lazy circles. Evenings cooled, shadows stretched, and the cabin filled with the smell of wood smoke from the stove, where I cooked canned meals. Nothing happened that would alarm a sane man. Yet from the second night, I heard its soft knocks against the cabin door, tentative at first, then insistent. I froze at the table, spoon halfway to my mouth. The knock repeated, measured, human. My breath hitched. My mind tried to rationalize. Wind tossing branches, wood contracting in the night air, but the rhythm was deliberate. I remembered Rule 4. Do not answer. There is no one out here. I stayed still, heart hammering, until the knocks ceased. In the morning, I found no tracks in the dirt, no marks on the door. The forest around the clearing was undisturbed. That was my first test, and I passed only by fear. By the end of the second week, the strangeness deepened. I had developed the habit, on Dalton's earlier advice, of counting the line of trees on the ridge each dawn as the sun rose. There were 12 crooked silhouettes against the sky, as fixed and reliable as the numbers on a clock. On the seventh morning, I counted 13. A new trunk stood where none had been, tall and black against the rising light. I blinked, counted again, rubbed my eyes. 13. The rules were clear. If the number changes, do not speak of it aloud. My instinct was to radio Dalton, but something tightened in my throat. I closed the logbook, forced myself to walk away, and did not mention it. The next day there were 12 again. The day after 14. The fluctuation made no sense, yet each time I remained silent. The rule did not explain what would happen if I spoke. I decided I did not want to learn. Nights became the real ordeal. Midnight in the forest is unlike any city darkness. It presses close, dense, alive with noises that do not belong to animals you recognize. Some nights the static of the radio grew restless, voices almost forming in the hiss, syllables half, heard like my name called from a distance. I kept the volume low but constant, as instructed. One night, around 2, the static broke into a woman's laugh, brief, brittle, and gone. My hand shook as I reached for the dial, but I remembered the rule, keep it on. I left it hissing until dawn. When I opened the cabin door that morning, the dirt showed footprints circling the cabin, heavy boots pressing into the soil, though I had not stepped outside since the evening. They led toward the forest, then vanished. I began to understand the loneliness was not emptiness but occupation. Something else lived here, invisible yet insistent. The rules were not superstitions but barricades. Each time I resisted the urge to disobey, I felt that unseen presence pressing against the glass, testing, waiting. It grew bolder. On the 11th night, I woke to the sound of footsteps on the metal staircase of the tower. Someone was climbing. I sat up in bed, my heart thudding. Through the window I could see the outline of the tower against the stars. A shadow moved along the steps, pausing midway, as though listening. I wanted to grab the flashlight, but Rule 1 burned in my mind, never descend after midnight, no matter what you hear. The figure ascended higher, slow, deliberate, until it reached the observation box at the top. The light inside was off, but I swore I saw the glass panes darken, as if filled with a presence. I sat frozen until dawn painted the horizon pale. When I climbed the tower at sunrise, the platform was empty, the desk in place, the glass clear. Only a faint smear across the window suggested something had pressed against it from within. As days blurred into weeks, My grip on ordinary reality thinned. Meals became tasteless routines. Sleep came fitfully, fractured by whispers outside. I would glance at the mirror above the sink and see, not my reflection, but a version of myself a fraction too slow in copying my movements. At first I thought it fatigue, a trick of poor light. Then one evening, after sunset, I leaned closer and whispered my name. My reflection's lips moved out of sync. That was the last time I looked into the mirror after dark. I draped a towel over it, obeying Rule 6. The towel sometimes shifted overnight, but I never removed it again until dawn. I kept a journal, at first with the discipline of a professional, noting weather conditions and reports. Over time, the entries turned to confessions of dread. I wrote down the rules each night before sleeping, as if rewriting them renewed their power. I no longer doubted their necessity. Dalton visited only once every 3 weeks, dropping supplies, asking no questions, his eyes scanning my face, as though to measure how much I had changed. I wanted to demand answers, to know what he had seen in his own seasons here, but I understood that silence was part of the contract. He left without explanation, and I returned to my post, bound to the forest by invisible chains of obligation. It was near the end of my first month that the test came closest to breaking me. A fire bloomed on the western horizon, a thin column of smoke rising against the dusk. I lifted binoculars, instinct sharpened to duty, and reported the coordinates on the radio. As I stared, however, the smoke seemed to curl unnaturally, twisting into shapes too deliberate, almost forming eyes. I remembered Rule 2, do not look too long at the smoke. With effort, I tore the binoculars from my face, breath ragged, head pounding. For the rest of the night, though, I felt those unseen eyes fixed upon me. The next morning, no smoke remained. No reports of wildfire came through. When I asked on the radio, headquarters replied that nothing was burning in that sector. I did not argue. The forest itself began to feel animate, responsive. The wind shifted in patterns like words, though never fully comprehensible. Birds fell silent in unison when I stepped outside. Once, while walking the perimeter of the clearing in daylight, I heard my own voice behind me, clear as a bell, calling my name. I spun, but the space was empty. That evening, the knocks on the door resumed, louder than before, rattling the wood. I sat with my back pressed to the wall, rifle in hand, though I knew bullets meant nothing here. The rules were the only weapon. By the time the season's midpoint approached, I had ceased doubting. Survival was obedience. The rules were not suggestions, they were lifelines. I etched them into the wood of the cabin desk, alongside other scrawls from those who came before. Some were faded, scratched by knives, some blurred by age, but all repeated the same commandments in variations. It struck me then that I was part of a lineage, each lookout preserving the next, by passing down these instructions. The forest took those who scoffed. It tested those who obeyed. I had no illusions of being stronger than those before me. I only hoped to endure long enough to walk back out at season's end. On the final night of that first month, the forest made its boldest move yet. The radio, which had been hissing low all evening, crackled suddenly clear. A voice spoke unmistakably Dalton's, urgent. "Adrian, come down to the truck. Now, emergency." I froze, hand on the dial. Through the window I saw headlights flicker in the clearing, the outline of a truck idling near the cabin. My chest clenched. It was past midnight. Never descend the steps after midnight, no matter what you hear. Rule 4, if someone knocks, do not answer. Yet the headlights glared real, the engine hummed. I nearly opened the door. Then I remembered Dalton's visits were scheduled, never unannounced. The radio hissed again, his voice sharper. "Adrian, it's not safe. Get down here." I backed away, heart pounding, and pressed myself into the corner. The headlights burned for hours, until dawn washed them away. When I stepped outside in daylight, the dirt was untouched, no tire tracks, no sign of a vehicle. Only silence. The rules had saved me again. That was the moment I stopped questioning and fully accepted. I was a guest here, tolerated only by adherence. The forest was alive in ways science would not acknowledge, and my survival depended on humility. I would endure, counting the trees, keeping the static on, refusing the knocks. I would obey, because the alternative was to vanish into the whispering dark, leaving only scrawled warnings for the next poor soul sent here. The rules were keeping me alive, and in the distance, I felt certain something was waiting for me to forget just one. The second month in the tower began with a restlessness I could not shake. The days were no longer a blank canvas of silence and boredom, but a tense waiting, every sound and shadow a possible test. I marked the calendar with scratches of a pen, counting down the weeks until rotation, yet each sunrise felt like stepping further from the world I had left behind. The job was supposed to be about patience, watching for smoke, but I had stopped believing my purpose was fire prevention alone. Each night reminded me that my true role was to prove myself worthy of the rules, to prove I would not falter when the forest called. I had lasted a month. Many before me had not. The names etched into the cabin desk were not all legible, but the silence of the forest seemed to keep their memory. On the third night of the new month, the knocks on the cabin door resumed, not tentative as before, but furious, rattling the hinges. I sat rigid on the bed, shotgun across my lap, though deep down I knew metal and powder offered no defense. The rules were clear: do not answer. The knocking grew so loud I feared the door would splinter, and then it stopped, leaving an echo inside my skull. When I stepped outside at dawn, the wood was unmarked, as though no hand had touched it. Yet in the dirt lay the impression of knees, as if someone had knelt there for hours. The prints faced the door, deep grooves pressed into the soil. I traced them with the tip of my boot and felt nausea rise. The forest did not just knock, it waited. Each day, the tree line on the ridge betrayed me with new numbers. One morning there were 16, a day later 11, then back to 12. I stopped trying to reconcile it. I no longer trusted my own eyes. Once, I counted 15, and when I turned away I felt, unmistakably, the presence of something watching, tall and still, at the edge of vision. I kept silent, as the rule demanded, but silence was no longer easy. It festered, an unspeakable secret in my throat. My journal pages grew frantic. Letters pressed so hard the pen tore the paper. I wrote only for myself, though even that I began to suspect was being read over my shoulder by something unseen. Around the second week, the radio static shifted. It had always been background, a constant hiss with occasional phantom syllables. But now, each evening as the sun dipped, the static thickened, pulsed almost with a heartbeat. I sat by the radio with a tightening chest, waiting. One night a voice emerged, gravelly, not Dalton's. It whispered my name, drawn out, syllables cracking. A-Dre-N. I lunged for the dial, tempted to shut it off, but I remembered the rule. Keep the radio on. Even if static fills the air, sometimes the static is the only warning. My hand hovered, then dropped. I left it on, though the voice chuckled low, a sound that seeped into the cabin walls. It lasted only seconds, then returned to hiss. The next morning, I discovered new carvings on the desk, not mine, not age. Fresh grooves in the wood spelled a single word: Lusta. My hands shook as I traced it. Whether some predecessor had returned, or the forest itself had learned to write, I could not say. Either way, the message was meant for me. Sleep became a battlefield. Dreams crawled with imagery too precise to dismiss as invention. I saw the tower engulfed in flame, though the fire never consumed, only circled, alive with faces that screamed silently. I saw myself descending the spiral staircase. Though my body moved like a puppet, each step against my will. Most nights I woke drenched in sweat, but one night I woke standing at the door, hand on the latch, having no memory of rising from bed. My fingers trembled as I pulled back, and I wedged a chair under the knob for the rest of the season. Even then, some mornings I found the chair dragged aside, though the door remained shut. The implication was clear: the forest could move what it pleased. The rules only held if I followed them consciously, if my will remained intact. Sleepwalking was a liability. I feared that more than fire. Dalton's next visit came late. Supplies were low, and my nerves frayed. When his truck finally pulled into the clearing at noon, I nearly collapsed from relief. He greeted me with the same squint, his silence heavy. As we carried boxes into the cabin, I asked, almost begged, what he knew of the rules. He froze, eyes sharp. "Don't ask," he muttered. "Knowing more won't help you. Doing as you're told will." His voice cracked at the edges, the first sign of strain I had ever heard in him. When I pressed, he snapped, "You think you're the first to hear the knocking. The voices. Just shut up and follow the rules." He slammed the final box onto the table and stalked outside. I chased after, but he had already climbed into the truck. As the engine roared, he glanced back, face ashen, and added, "Don't let them trick you into breaking the silence." Then he was gone, the dust of his tires settling into the void he left. I stood alone again, the weight of his words heavier than the supplies. That night, the trick came. Around 1 in the morning, the radio cleared suddenly, not static but a crisp, professional voice from headquarters. "Lookout 42, this is base. Urgent fire in your sector. Repeat, urgent. Descend immediately and rendezvous at cabin for evacuation." My chest clenched. A fire. The window reflected only darkness, no glow of flame. Still, the voice was steady, convincing. I paced the cabin, torn between duty and rule. Rule 1 was clear: never descend after midnight. Yet here was authority, direct and commanding. My hand pressed against the door, sweat slicking my palm. Then I remembered Dalton's warning: don't let them trick you. I forced myself back, heart hammering, and waited. For an hour the voice repeated, calm, persuasive, promising safety if I just stepped outside. By dawn, it faded back into static. When I finally opened the door, the forest stood unburned, silent, eternal. I realized then the rules were not just survival, they were defiance. Every temptation to break them was bait, designed to lure me into the dark. Days stretched on. Food grew monotonous. Beans, rice, stale bread, but hunger dulled the disgust. My beard thickened, nails dirtied, body thinner by the week. But the forest's games grew richer. One afternoon, while sweeping the horizon with binoculars, I saw a figure standing among the trees on the ridge. Tall, thin, its skin pale against the green, motionless. I blinked, lowered the glasses, raised them again. It remained, staring back. Panic surged, but curiosity chained me. I counted the trees. 14 that morning, 15 now. The figure stood where the extra should be. I nearly whispered the number, the confession pressing my lips, but I bit down until I tasted blood. The figure's head tilted, almost disappointed. Then the wind shifted, and it was gone. My silence saved me, but it left me hollow. The rules demanded obedience, but each time I obeyed, I felt more of myself erode. By the third week, isolation blurred with hallucination. The towel over the mirror no longer sufficed. I began to avoid even glass windows after sunset. Once, I caught my reflection in the dark pane, smiling though my face was not. I stumbled back, heart racing, convinced the thing behind the glass wanted to trade places. I draped cloth over every reflective surface, turning the cabin into a dim cocoon. Still, the feeling lingered that eyes watched from every shimmer, every puddle, every polished metal surface. I no longer dared clean the dishes fully, leaving them dulled with soot to kill the shine. The radio escalated its assaults. Static twisted into words, voices of people I once knew. My mother calling me home for dinner. A friend laughing, a lover's whisper. Each voice pierced, aching with memory, but I forced myself to ignore them. The rules said nothing about voices from the past, but instinct told me this was another trap. I sat rigid, staring at the black mouth of the radio, letting the voices wash over me without response. At times I wanted to scream, to smash the machine, but I knew that silence of another kind might mean blindness. Static was warning, the voices were bait. I endured, teeth grinding, until the sun rose each day. It was near the end of the month that the forest staged its cruelest trick. One evening, just before sunset, I heard footsteps approaching along the dirt road. Real, heavy, human. My pulse spiked as I looked out and saw Dalton striding toward the cabin, his figure unmistakable. He waved, called my name. Relief surged so hard I almost cried. He climbed the steps, knocked firmly, just as he always did. My hand gripped the knob. Rule 4: do not answer if someone knocks after dark. But it was Dalton. I glanced at the clock. Sun below horizon, night officially begun. The rule held. My chest burned with conflict. He called again, voice urgent. "Adrian, it's me. Open up." I bit my lip until I tasted iron, shaking with the effort not to yield. For an hour he begged, cursed, pleaded. Then silence. By morning, no tracks, no truck, no Dalton. When the real Dalton arrived days later with supplies, I stared at him in horror. He raised an eyebrow. "What?" I stammered. "You came last week. You knocked." His face hardened. "No, and if you opened, you wouldn't be here." He unloaded the boxes and left me with more silence. My knees gave way as soon as the truck was gone. The rules had kept me alive again, but the cost was the erosion of every instinct to trust. The days that followed blurred. I ate little, slept less, counted trees without faith in the numbers. The forest seemed to pulse with expectation, waiting for me to slip, to crack, to speak when silence was required. I began to understand that survival was not only about obeying rules, but about maintaining the will to keep obeying, even as exhaustion hollowed me. The tower loomed above, a spire of both refuge and prison. Each time I climbed, I felt the forest watching, calculating. I could not say how much longer I could last. Only that the rules, strange as they were, remained the thin thread between me and the darkness pressing close. A darkness that would seize the smallest mistake as invitation. The second month ended with me alive, but barely. The rules had saved me again and again, yet each test was sharper, crueler. I could feel the season turning, the air crisper, the days shorter. The forest was patient. It had eternity. I had only endurance. And I feared that one night soon, when the knocks came louder or the voice more familiar, I would falter. The rules were keeping me alive. But for how much longer, I did not know. The third month in the tower began with a strange calm, as though the forest had grown wary of games. For a few days the nights were quiet, the radio a simple hiss, the tree line unchanging. I almost believed the trials had passed, that perhaps I had endured enough to earn peace. But peace in this place was never a gift, it was bait. A pause before the next attempt to unravel me. I learned this on the fifth night, when I woke not to knocking or voices, but to silence so complete it felt suffocating. No insects, no wind, not even the creak of wood. The forest had withdrawn every sound, leaving a void that pressed against my ears. I lay in bed, terrified of the absence. When the static of the radio cut out entirely, leaving pure nothingness, I nearly screamed. Instead, I clutched the pillow over my head and forced myself to breathe until dawn bled pale through the window. The static returned then, faint and familiar, and I understood. Even silence here was a weapon. The following days dragged heavy with exhaustion. I found myself walking in circles around the clearing, kicking stones, muttering to myself just to prove my voice still existed. I wrote in the journal more often, filling pages with fragmented thoughts, lists, memories of home. The entries grew erratic, pen strokes jag. I reread the rules every night like scripture, grounding myself in their certainty. They were the only truths left, the only anchor when everything else shifted. Rule 1, never descend after midnight. Rule 2, don't look too long at the smoke. Rule 3, if the tree count changes, stay silent. Rule 4, don't answer knocks. Rule 5, keep the radio on. Rule 6, don't trust mirrors after dark. Rule 7, remember you are not alone. I whispered them under my breath like a prayer until sleep finally took me. It was during one of those restless nights that I made the mistake of staring too long into the dark. The tower, with its panoramic view, was both sanctuary and curse. I climbed near midnight, restless, hoping the air might calm me. The horizon stretched endless, stars brilliant above. Then I saw it, far to the north, a plume of smoke rising, faint but real. My training screamed at me to report it, and I reached for the radio. But as I watched, the smoke shifted, curling into spirals, forming the outline of an eye that blinked once, slowly, directly at me. My chest seized. Rule 2. Do not look too long at the smoke. I forced myself back, eyes watering, throat dry. The smoke dissolved into mist. I gave the coordinates anyway, voice shaking. But headquarters responded flatly, no fire detected. The silence after their words left me trembling. I had looked too long. The feeling of being seen lingered for days, as though something beyond the horizon had fixed its attention on me. The forest began to show itself more boldly after that. During one morning sweep, I caught movement among the trees at the clearing's edge. A figure stood there, tall, gaunt, its body draped in bark, like skin, face shadowed. I blinked, and it was gone, but the impression of its presence clung to the air. Later that same day, while preparing a meal in the cabin, I heard footsteps pacing just outside the walls. Slow, deliberate. They circled the cabin once, twice, 3 times, then stopped at the door. The knob rattled. I froze, spoon halfway to my mouth. Rule 4, do not answer. My heart pounded as the knob twisted back and forth. After several minutes it stilled, and the footsteps receded. When I dared open the door at dawn, no prints marked the soil. The forest had learned mimicry, adopting the habits of men. It was no longer content to whisper. It wanted me to believe it could walk and knock and speak. Perhaps it could. Dalton's next visit provided little comfort. He arrived mid-afternoon, face weathered more than before. He looked at me carefully, eyes narrowing at the towel, covered mirror, the cloth, draped windows. You're lasting, he said quietly, almost with surprise. I demanded again to know the truth, what the rules really meant, what lived in the forest. He shook his head. Doesn't matter. If you follow them, you'll walk out. If you don't, you won't. That's all there is. His tone was final. As he unloaded supplies, I noticed scars along his forearms, thin white lines like claw marks. He caught me staring and pulled his sleeves down. Don't ask, he muttered. When he left, I felt the absence more sharply than ever. I realized then that Dalton himself was a survivor, marked by whatever tests he had faced in his own seasons. And like me, he had chosen silence. The forest grew bolder as summer edged toward autumn. Leaves began to tinge with yellow, nights colder, shadows longer. One evening I heard children's laughter outside the cabin. High-pitched, playful, carried on the wind. My chest clenched, an ache of memory, but I forced myself to stay seated. There were no children for miles. The laughter circled the clearing, rising and falling, then stopped abruptly. The silence afterward was worse. I realized then the forest had shifted strategy. It no longer tried only to frighten me. Now it sought to coax, to lure me with familiarity and warmth. Memories, voices, even illusions of people I once loved. Anything to make me step outside or speak when silence was required. Each night became a trial of restraint, not just against fear, but against longing. One of the cruelest tricks came in the form of my own voice. I was climbing the tower near dusk when I heard someone call my name from below. I looked down, and there I was, my own figure standing at the base looking up. My stomach dropped, the double raised a hand, waved, smiled faintly. I gripped the railing, terror flooding me. It was me, but not. The figure spoke in my voice. "Come down, Adrian, it's safe." Rule 1 screamed in my mind. I stayed frozen, nails digging into the metal. The figure waited, smile fading into something darker, eyes hollow. Then, like mist, it vanished. I collapsed onto the steps, shaking. The rules had saved me again, but the forest had found the sharpest weapon myself. Sleep deteriorated into fragments. I would doze for an hour, wake in panic, doze again. Each time I dreamed of fire licking the tower's base, of trees crowding closer to the clearing, of the mirror pulling me through. My journal filled with incoherent scribbles, prayers, curses. I stopped writing dates, lost track of days. Food dwindled, though Dalton's deliveries remained regular. I rationed tightly, unwilling to risk hunger adding to the madness. Yet still I lost weight, my ribs visible in the mirror each morning before I covered it. My beard grew wild, hands trembling more often than not. Survival had become a war of attrition. Each day I lasted was victory. Each night I obeyed was salvation. But my strength waned. The worst night of the 3rd month came with a storm. Thunder cracked. Rain lashed the cabin, wind howled through the trees. I huddled inside, lantern dim, radio hissing louder than usual. At midnight, a knock boomed on the door. Louder than ever before, shaking the frame. I clutched the shotgun, though I knew it was useless. The knock repeated, then a voice, my mother's, calling softly, begging to be let in. My throat closed. I pressed my back to the wall, tears stinging my eyes. The voice pleaded for an hour, shifting from gentle to desperate to furious. At one point it screamed my name, a sound that rattled the glass. I bit my fist to keep silent. At dawn the voice ceased, leaving only rain. When I opened the door, nothing waited, but the knob was damp, as if gripped by real flesh. I collapsed to my knees sobbing. The rules had held, but I felt a piece of myself crack irreparably. After that storm, I began to sense the forest's patience thinning. It had tested me for months, and I had not broken. But I knew the trials would grow sharper, the temptations stronger. I could not relax, not even for an instant. The rules were keeping me alive, yes, but they demanded everything. My trust, my sanity, my endurance. I wondered how many others had lasted this long, how many had walked out at season's end with their mind intact. Perhaps none. Perhaps Dalton was a ghost himself, a survivor only in appearance. I could not be sure. All I knew was that I had made it to the halfway mark of the season. The forest had not taken me yet, but the cost was visible in my shaking hands, my hollow eyes, my fraying mind. The rules were my shield, but also my chains. And as the 3rd month closed, I realized the real question was not whether I could obey them, but whether I could remain myself while doing so. By the time the 4th month arrived, the air had turned crisp and sharp, mornings veiled with frost that clung to the grass around the cabin. The forest's green began to yellow, patches of orange and red smoldering in the canopy, and the night stretched long enough that darkness seemed to rule most hours of the day. With the change in season came a change in the forest's methods. Where before it had pressed me with voices and shadows, now it began to erode the very fabric of what I believed to be real. I no longer trusted my senses, and that mistrust was its own kind of torment. The first sign of this shift came one morning, when I climbed the tower to scan the horizon. The forest stretched vast and endless, but as I swept the binoculars across the ridges, I stopped short. There was a lake to the east, shining pale blue, where I had never seen water before. Its surface reflected the dawn, rippling as though stirred by wind. I rubbed my eyes, lowered the glasses, and the lake was gone. Only the unbroken trees remained. When I lifted the binoculars again, the lake returned. For nearly an hour I tested it, on and off, there and gone. My throat went dry. The rules said nothing about phantom landscapes, but instinct told me the same principle applied. Do not acknowledge, do not speak. I made no report, closed the logbook, and climbed down. For days after, whenever I turned my head too quickly, I swore I saw glimmers of water among the trees, but I forced myself never to look straight. A few days later, it targeted my hearing. While cooking one evening, the radio hiss began to pattern itself into something rhythmic, almost musical. At first it sounded like random pulses, but soon it formed into words, a familiar song from childhood. My hand froze over the pan. I mouthed the lyrics without meaning to, lips moving in sync with the static. Then I caught myself and slammed the volume down low, heart racing. The forest was trying to draw me in, to make me speak when silence was required. I stuffed a rag against the speaker but kept the radio on, as the rule demanded, and sat in the dark listening to the muffled hum until dawn. Even muffled, I felt the vibrations crawling across the cabin floor like fingers. Sleep became a luxury I could not afford. Each night, the line between dream and waking blurred. I would open my eyes in bed and see the cabin rearranged. Chairs shifted, books stacked differently, lantern burning though I had snuffed it. When I blinked, everything returned to normal. Other nights I dreamed of leaving the cabin, walking into the trees, only to jolt awake standing at the door with my hand on the latch. I tied a cord around my wrist and anchored it to the bed frame, hoping it might restrain me. Some mornings the cord was unknotted neatly, coiled beside me. Whether I had undone it myself in sleep, or something else had, I refused to consider. Dalton's visits had become both a lifeline and a wound. He arrived with supplies like a ghost, said little, left quickly. But during his 4th-month visit, I forced myself to confront him. As he stacked boxes, I said, "The rules keep me alive, I know that now. But they don't stop the forest from breaking me piece by piece. How much longer do I have to endure this?" Dalton paused, back turned, shoulders tight. "Until the season ends," he said. His voice was flat, but then he added, quieter, "If you can last." I pressed harder. "What happens to the ones who don't?" He looked at me then, and in his eyes was something like pity. "You've heard them. You've seen them. That's what happens. They stop being themselves. They become part of it." He set the last box down, gripped my shoulder once, and left. His words hung heavy in the cabin long after the truck's engine faded. Part of it. The thought made my skin crawl. The tests escalated after that. One night, around midnight, the knocks began again, but this time they came not from the door, but from beneath the floorboards. Hollow, resonant, as if fists pounded from under the cabin itself. I froze, every muscle taut. The knocks traveled, circling beneath me, then stopped directly under the bed. The wood groaned, sagging slightly, as though something pressed upward. I bit my lip, clutching the blanket around me, whispering the rules under my breath. At dawn, when I dared look, the dirt beneath the cabin was undisturbed, no tunnels, no signs of intrusion. But I could not bring myself to step barefoot on the floor for days. Then came the mirror. For weeks I had kept it covered, avoiding its lure after dark. But one evening, while washing up, the towel slipped, and I glimpsed my reflection. At first it was normal, haggard but mine. Then it smiled, my face, my eyes, but a grin that stretched too wide, teeth bared, feral. I stumbled back, heart hammering, and threw the towel over it. For hours afterward I felt the weight of that grin pressing through the fabric, as though the other version of me waited patiently for the chance to step out. That night I dreamed of waking to find the towel gone, the mirror empty, and a figure sitting across the room, wearing my face. Food supplies dwindled again, though I rationed carefully. Hunger gnawed, fraying my patience. The forest used this too. One morning, the smell of bacon and coffee drifted through the clearing, mouth-watering and impossible. I hadn't tasted either in months. I stepped outside, nose lifting to the scent, stomach growling. The aroma came from the tree line, curling between trunks. My body lurched forward before my mind caught up. I stopped just short of the clearing's edge, toes curling in the dirt. Rule 1 said nothing about hunger, but every fiber of me screamed that crossing into the trees would be surrender. I staggered back, fists clenched, tears stinging my eyes. The smell faded, replaced by the usual musk of pine and soil. That night I ate beans cold from a can, the taste ash in my mouth. The forest was wearing me down. Not with a single blow, but with relentless erosion. Each day it carved at me, each night it pressed harder. I began talking aloud to myself constantly, just to anchor my voice, to remind myself what was real. I repeated my name, my age, the date, though I was no longer certain the dates were right. My journal became a list of facts, desperate affirmations. My name is Adrian Cole. I am 26. I am in Alberta. I am alive. The words felt fragile, but they were mine, for now. Midway through the 4th month, the forest played its boldest trick yet. I woke to the sound of Dalton's voice outside the cabin, calling my name. My chest seized. He called again, urgent, familiar. Against every instinct, I stepped to the window. There he stood, just beyond the clearing, face pale in moonlight. "Adrian," he said, "it's not safe. Come with me." My hand hovered over the latch. The rules screamed in my skull, "Do not answer. Do not descend." But Dalton was the one person I trusted. I hesitated too long. The figure's expression shifted, smile stretching unnaturally wide, eyes black. It tilted its head, then vanished into the trees. I collapsed against the wall, shaking violently. The forest had almost succeeded. It had learned my last defense, trust, and twisted it. After that, the nights became unbearable. Knocks, voices, laughter, footsteps, sometimes all at once. I huddled in bed with the lantern low, reciting the rules until my voice cracked. Sleep came only in scraps, punctured by jolts of terror. My body weakened, bones aching, skin clammy. I felt myself thinning, dissolving into the same haze that consumed others. But each morning, when dawn light pierced the window and the radio returned to simple static, I knew I had endured one more night. The rules were not just instructions. They were commandments etched into the marrow of my bones, the only thing separating me from whatever waited hungrily just beyond sight. As the 4th month ended, frost thickened, breath steamed in the air, and the forest stood skeletal, its leaves thinning. I had survived another cycle, but survival felt hollow. I was less man, more ghost, bound to the rules like chains. Yet I clung to them, because without them there was nothing. The forest wanted me silent, broken, part of its endless game. I wanted only to last. The season was not over. The worst, I sensed, had yet to come. And I wondered how many more nights I could endure before the forest found the one crack it needed to take me. By the time the 4th month arrived, the air had turned crisp and sharp, mornings veiled with frost that clung to the grass around the cabin. The forest's green began to yellow, patches of orange and red smoldering in the canopy, and the nights stretched long enough that darkness seemed to rule most hours of the day. With the change in season came a change in the forest's methods. Where before it had pressed me with voices and shadows, now it began to erode the very fabric of what I believed to be real. I no longer trusted my senses, and that mistrust was its own kind of torment. The first sign of this shift came one morning, when I climbed the tower to scan the horizon. The forest stretched vast and endless, But as I swept the binoculars across the ridges, I stopped short. There was a lake to the east, shining pale blue, where I had never seen water before. Its surface reflected the dawn, rippling as though stirred by wind. I rubbed my eyes, lowered the glasses, and the lake was gone. Only the unbroken trees remained. When I lifted the binoculars again, the lake returned. For nearly an hour I tested it, on and off, there and gone. My throat went dry. The rules said nothing about phantom landscapes, but instinct told me the same principle applied. Do not acknowledge, do not speak. I made no report, closed the logbook, and climbed down. For days after, whenever I turned my head too quickly, I swore I saw glimmers of water among the trees, but I forced myself never to look straight. A few days later, it targeted my hearing. While cooking one evening, the radio hiss began to pattern itself into something rhythmic, almost musical. At first it sounded like random pulses, but soon it formed into words, a familiar song from childhood. My hand froze over the pan. I mouthed the lyrics without meaning to, lips moving in sync with the static. Then I caught myself and slammed the volume down low, heart racing. The forest was trying to draw me in, to make me speak when silence was required. I stuffed a rag against the speaker, but kept the radio on, as the rule demanded, and sat in the dark listening to the muffled hum until dawn. Even muffled, I felt the vibrations crawling across the cabin floor like fingers. Sleep became a luxury I could not afford. Each night, the line between dream and waking blurred. I would open my eyes in bed and see the cabin rearranged. Chairs shifted, books stacked differently, lantern burning though I had snuffed it. When I blinked, everything returned to normal. Other nights I dreamed of leaving the cabin, walking into the trees, only to jolt awake standing at the door with my hand on the latch. I tied a cord around my wrist and anchored it to the bed frame, hoping it might restrain me. Some mornings the cord was unknotted neatly, coiled beside me. Whether I had undone it myself in sleep or something else had, I refused to consider. Dalton's visits had become both a lifeline and a wound. He arrived with supplies like a ghost, said little, left quickly. But during his 4th-month visit, I forced myself to confront him. As he stacked boxes, I said, "The rules keep me alive, I know that now. But they don't stop the forest from breaking me piece by piece. How much longer do I have to endure this?" Dalton paused, back turned, shoulders tight. "Until the season ends," he said. His voice was flat, but then he added, quieter, "If you can last." I pressed harder. "What happens to the ones who don't?" He looked at me then, and in his eyes was something like pity. "You've heard them. You've seen them. That's what happens. They stop being themselves. They become part of it." He set the last box down, gripped my shoulder once, and left. His words hung heavy in the cabin long after the truck's engine faded. Part of it. The thought made my skin crawl. The tests escalated after that. One night, around midnight, the knocks began again, but this time they came not from the door but from beneath the floorboards. Hollow, resonant, as if fists pounded from under the cabin itself. I froze, every muscle taut. The knocks traveled, circling beneath me, then stopped directly under the bed. The wood groaned, sagging slightly, as though something pressed upward. I bit my lip, clutching the blanket around me, whispering the rules under my breath. At dawn, when I dared look, the dirt beneath the cabin was undisturbed, no tunnels, no signs of intrusion. But I could not bring myself to step barefoot on the floor for days. Then came the mirror. For weeks I had kept it covered, avoiding its lure after dark. But one evening, while washing up, the towel slipped, and I glimpsed my reflection. At first it was normal, haggard but mine. Then it smiled. My face, my eyes, but a grin that stretched too wide, teeth bared, feral. I stumbled back, heart hammering, and threw the towel over it. For hours afterward I felt the weight of that grin pressing, through the fabric, as though the other version of me waited patiently for the chance to step out. That night I dreamed of waking to find the towel gone, the mirror empty, and a figure sitting across the room, wearing my face. Food supplies dwindled again, though I rationed carefully. Hunger gnawed, fraying my patience. The forest used this too. One morning, the smell of bacon and coffee drifted through the clearing. Mouth-watering and impossible. I hadn't tasted either in months. I stepped outside, nose lifting to the scent, stomach growling. The aroma came from the tree line, curling between trunks. My body lurched forward before my mind caught up. I stopped just short of the clearing's edge, toes curling in the dirt. Rule 1 said nothing about hunger, but every fiber of me screamed that crossing into the trees would be surrender. I staggered back, fists clenched, tears stinging my eyes. The smell faded, replaced by the usual musk of pine and soil. That night I ate beans cold from a can, the taste ash in my mouth. The forest was wearing me down, not with a single blow but with relentless erosion. Each day it carved at me, each night it pressed harder. I began talking aloud to myself constantly, just to anchor my voice, to remind myself what was real. I repeated my name, my age, the date, though I was no longer certain the dates were right. My journal became a list of facts, desperate affirmations. My name is Adrian Cole. I am 26. I am in Alberta. I am alive. The words felt fragile, but they were mine, for now. Midway through the 4th month, the forest played its boldest trick yet. I woke to the sound of Dalton's voice outside the cabin, calling my name. My chest seized. He called again, urgent, familiar. Against every instinct, I stepped to the window. There he stood, just beyond the clearing, face pale in moonlight. "Adrian," he said, "it's not safe. Come with me." My hand hovered over the latch. The rules screamed in my skull, do not answer, do not descend. But Dalton was the one person I trusted. I hesitated too long. The figure's expression shifted, smile stretching unnaturally wide, eyes black. It tilted its head, then vanished into the trees. I collapsed against the wall, shaking violently. The forest had almost succeeded. It had learned my last defense, trust, and twisted it. After that, the nights became unbearable. Knocks, voices, laughter, footsteps, sometimes all at once. I huddled in bed with the lantern low, reciting the rules until my voice cracked. Sleep came only in scraps, punctured by jolts of terror. My body weakened, bones aching, skin clammy. I felt myself thinning, dissolving into the same haze that consumed others. But each morning, when dawn light pierced the window and the radio returned to simple static, I knew I had endured one more night. The rules were not just instructions. They were commandments etched into the marrow of my bones, the only thing separating me from whatever waited hungrily just beyond sight. As the 4th month ended, frost thickened, breath steamed in the air, and the forest stood skeletal, its leaves thinning. I had survived another cycle, but survival felt hollow. I was less man, more ghost, bound to the rules like chains. Yet I clung to them, because without them there was nothing. The forest wanted me silent, broken, part of its endless game. I wanted only to last. The season was not over. The worst, I sensed, had yet to come. And I wondered how many more nights I could endure before the forest found the one crack it needed to take me. The 6th month arrived like the tightening of a vise. The air grew brittle, the first snows dusting the branches, and the forest seemed sharper, stripped of its summer camouflage. With the leaves gone, the shapes between the trunks stood clearer, darker, harder to dismiss as tricks of the eye. The forest no longer needed subtlety. It had worn me down with hunger, fatigue, silence, and longing. Now it moved in for the kill. The very first night of that month, I woke to find the cabin lantern blazing, though I had left it dark. My journal lay open on the table, words scrawled in my own handwriting, O-pen-th-do-r. The letters gouged deep, as if pressed by a hand not my own. My stomach twisted. I closed the book, shoved it under the mattress, and whispered the rules until the lantern's flame guttered down. But in the morning, the words were there again, written across the wall above the desk, scratched into the wood. My fingernails split when I tried to claw them off. The forest had begun to write inside the cabin itself. The knocks changed too. They no longer came from the door alone, but from the windows, from the roof, from beneath the floor. One night they all sounded together, a cacophony that shook the cabin like a storm. I crouched in the corner, hands pressed to my ears, body shaking. The sound ceased only at dawn, leaving silence that rang louder than the knocks themselves. When I stepped outside, frost covered every surface, and on the tower steps, etched in the ice, were boot prints leading halfway up, then stopping abruptly. I climbed at sunrise, heart hammering, but the prints ended in midair, as though whoever left them had simply vanished. The radio grew crueler. Voices no longer whispered from the static. They spoke clearly, sentences sharp. They called me by name, told me lies, promised release. Some nights they repeated the rules back to me, in my own voice, twisting the words. Rule 1. My voice hissed from the static, is to come down after midnight. Rule 2 is to stare into the smoke until it takes you. Rule 3 is to speak of the trees. Rule 4 is to open the door. I shut my eyes, teeth clenched, refusing to listen. But the voices grew louder, filling the cabin. Sometimes I thought I heard them laughing. Dalton came once more, perhaps for the last time. His face was drawn, his eyes bloodshot. He unloaded the supplies in silence, but as he turned to leave, I grabbed his arm. I can't keep this up, I said, voice breaking. I'm not going to make it. He looked at me long and hard. You've made it further than most. His voice cracked, something almost like compassion in it. Don't give them what they want. They want you to break the rules. That's the only way they win. He started for the truck. I called after him. What happens if I survive to the end? He paused, one hand on the door, then climbed in without answering. The engine roared, the truck vanished, and I was alone again. His silence told me more than words could have. Survival itself was not guaranteed salvation. The forest pressed harder. One evening, I climbed the tower near dusk to log the horizon. When I reached the top, I froze. The glass walls no longer showed the forest outside, but reflections of the cabin interior, as though I stood inside a mirror. My heart lurched. I stepped forward, pressed my hand against the glass, and the reflection pressed back, smiling. My own face, but wrong. Eyes too dark, grin too wide. I stumbled backward, nearly tumbling down the stairs. By the time I reached the cabin again, the reflection was gone, the view normal. But I knew the forest was closing in from every angle, even from the sky. Sleep deserted me entirely. My body shook with exhaustion, eyes burning, thoughts fractured. I began to hear whispers not just at night, but during the day, while chopping wood, while boiling water, even while writing in my journal. Sometimes they repeated the rules mockingly. Sometimes they hissed nonsense. Sometimes they called my name in tones that mimicked my own. I stopped trusting my thoughts. I wrote everything down to prove I still existed. Yet even my writing betrayed me, the pages filling with words I did not remember setting down. It was during this collapse that the forest launched its most vicious assault. One night, as frost rimed the window, the knocks came again, but this time they were followed by screams. Real, human screams begging for help. I bolted upright, heart tearing itself apart. The voice belonged to a woman, shrill with terror, crying my name. I pressed my hands to my ears, but her cries seeped through, ragged, desperate. Adrian, please, help me. It's burning. My throat constricted. Rule 4, do not answer the door. I clenched my fists, tears burning my eyes. The screams lasted until dawn, then cut off mid-sob. When I stepped outside in daylight, the frost on the ground was streaked with dark stains, vanishing into the trees. I nearly collapsed, retching. The forest knew my last weak point, compassion. It would weaponize anything to make me break. After that night, I stopped venturing outside, except when absolutely necessary. The cabin became a coffin, narrow and airless. I rationed food tighter, lit the stove only sparingly. My ribs jutted through my shirt, my beard tangled, my hands shook constantly. Each sunrise felt like a stolen miracle. Each sunset felt like a death sentence delayed only by obedience. Then came the night when the forest tried to end me outright. The radio, usually a hiss of static, suddenly burst into clarity near midnight. A voice from headquarters, crisp and authoritative, declared, "All lookouts, immediate evacuation. Wildfire spreading from the south. Leave your towers at once." My breath caught. It sounded real urgent. I grabbed my pack, hand on the door latch. Rule 1 screamed in my mind. Never descend after midnight. My entire body trembled, torn between duty and survival. I pressed my forehead to the door, listening. Outside, I heard engines, shouts, voices calling instructions. Relief surged, and then I realized the forest was silent. No birds, no insects, no wind, only the voices. My stomach dropped. I stepped back, collapsed against the wall, and forced myself to stay put. The voices shouted for an hour, then faded. At dawn, the forest stood untouched, no smoke, no fire. If I had obeyed, I would not have returned. By the end of the 6th month, I was scarcely human. My journal was filled with frantic repetitions of my name, the rules, fragments of prayers. My body was weak, my mind frayed. The forest pressed closer every night, its voices sharper, its illusions bolder. But I had obeyed. I had lasted. Somehow I was still alive. As the first heavy snow fell, blanketing the clearing, I marked another slash on the calendar. My voice was a whisper, cracked and thin, but I said the words anyway. My name is Adrian Cole. I am alive. The rules are keeping me alive. The forest did not answer. It waited. The season was not over. The final month loomed, and I knew the forest would not let me leave without one last attempt to claim me. The 7th month began with snow heavy enough to bend the pines. The clearing shrank under drifts, the tower's steps sheathed in ice, the cabin walls groaning under wind that howled like voices. I had survived half a year, but I was no longer certain what survival meant. My body was a shadow of itself, bones jutting, skin pale, eyes ringed black. My mind was thinner still, worn to threads. The forest had failed to take me, yet in a way it had already succeeded. I was its creature now, bound to its rules, unable to think outside them. From the first night of that final month, it was clear the forest would not let me go quietly. The tests escalated beyond anything I had endured. Shadows walked openly across the snow, tall and spindly, their footsteps leaving no prints. The radio hissed constantly with voices I recognized, sometimes my own, sometimes Dalton's, sometimes people long dead. The tree line shifted not by numbers anymore, but by whole landscapes. Valleys where ridges had been, towers of trunks where fields had stretched. My journal entries dissolved into nonsense, ink smeared by trembling hands, whole pages filled with only the words ahald te raos. Hal teach ralas. The first week of snow, the forest tried hunger. The supply crates Dalton had left seemed lighter than before, the cans fewer. I rationed carefully, but my stomach clawed itself hollow. Then came the smells again, meat roasting, bread baking, coffee brewing, rising from the tree line, drifting into the cabin. One night, the aroma was so strong I gagged with craving. I dreamed of feasts, of sitting at a table piled with food. I woke with teeth marks in my own arm, the taste of iron in my mouth. I bound the wound and whispered the rules until my head ached. The second week, the forest tried memory. One night the knocks came as usual, but when I ignored them, The door rattled and my father's voice called from outside. "Adrian," he said gently, "I'm proud of you. Open up, son." My chest caved. My father had been dead for 3 years. Tears stung my eyes as the voice went on, calm and familiar. "It's over now. You can come home." My hand rose toward the latch, trembling before I bit down hard enough to draw blood and staggered back. The voice grew sharper, crueler, until dawn broke and silence returned. My jaw ached from clenching, but I was alive. By the 3rd week, the forest abandoned pretense. One night I climbed the tower at dusk, and when I reached the top I froze. The horizon burned. Flames roared across the tree line, smoke curling high, the sky painted crimson. My chest locked. I seized the radio, reported the fire with trembling voice. Headquarters answered with silence. The flames crept closer, heat washing against my face though the snow below remained cold. I nearly broke. I nearly believed. Then I forced myself to close my eyes, whisper Rule 2, do not look too long at the smoke. When I opened them, the flames were gone. The forest stretched unbroken, snow white under stars. My knees gave way, and I sank to the floor of the tower, sobbing. It was during the final days that the forest revealed its true cruelty. For months it had knocked, whispered, tempted. Now it sought to break me outright. One night, the static of the radio gave way to a voice crisp and cold. "Adrian Cole, your service is complete. Descend the tower. Leave the cabin. Your replacement has arrived." My stomach dropped. It sounded real, official. I almost believed. Then came the footsteps. Real, heavy, crunching snow. I looked from the tower and saw a man trudging into the clearing, bundled in winter gear, carrying a lantern. He waved. "Relief shift," he called. "You can go home." My breath caught. My season was supposed to end soon. My body screamed for release, for escape. I gripped the railing until my knuckles cracked. Rule 1, never descend after midnight. Rule 7, remember you are not alone. My gut told me the truth. This was the final trap. I backed away, crouched in the tower's corner, hands over my ears. The figure waited all night, lantern glowing. By dawn it was gone, no prints in the snow. The night before the end of my contract, the forest unleashed everything. The knocks thundered, the voices screamed, the mirror rattled against the wall. The radio erupted with laughter. Shadows pressed against the windows, tall and faceless. The cabin shook as though under storm, though outside the snow lay still. I crouched on the floor, arms around my knees, whispering the rules over and over, louder than the din. My voice cracked, my throat tore, but I kept going. Hours passed, or maybe minutes. I felt the forest pressing in, desperate, furious, clawing for any crack in my will. But I held. When dawn finally broke, light spilling through the window, everything fell silent at once. The forest retreated, leaving only the hiss of the radio and the beat of my heart. Dalton arrived that afternoon, truck tires crunching snow, his face unreadable. He looked me over, gaunt, trembling, wild-eyed, and nodded once. "You lasted," he said simply. "I wanted to ask if it was truly over, if I was free, if the rules would follow me home." But my voice caught. He loaded my meager belongings into the truck, and I climbed in beside him. As we drove away, the tower shrank in the mirror until it was a needle among trees, then vanished. I should have felt relief. I should have felt triumph. Instead, I felt only emptiness. The rules had kept me alive, but they had taken everything else. I could no longer sleep without whispering them. I could no longer look at smoke without fear of eyes staring back. I covered every mirror in my apartment, left the radio on static through the night. Friends said I looked hollow. They asked what I had seen. I said nothing. The rules were still with me. They always would be. And sometimes, when the world grows quiet, when the night deepens, I hear it again, the knock at the door. Gentle at first, then insistent. I sit frozen, repeating the rules under my breath. I never answer. I know better now. The forest is patient. It has eternity. And it is still waiting for me to forget.